In seconds of live silence, Jasmine Crockett shattered 5 years of polished image-making. On a Women in Power stage, one calm line left millions breathless and put Melania Trump in every headline without ever naming her. It wasn't an attack, but a mirror, and the reflection shook the nation. What began as a question on leadership became a reckoning with silence, privilege, and the cost of a first lady who disappears when it matters most. And when truth cuts that deep, who can walk away unscarred? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The lights were brutal, glaring down on the stage like interrogation lamps. Everything gleamed shiny, stiff, controlled like a courtroom built for order. 5 women sat in a perfect curve of ivory chairs, faces lit, scripts memorized. C-SPAN's cameras glided like hunters on steel tracks, waiting to catch every breath, every twitch. The subject was women in power, but the atmosphere was lifeless, a ceremony in slow motion until a single voice cracked it wide open. Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't the first to speak, but when she finally did, it felt like the ground split open beneath the room. The moderator had tossed a simple question. Do spouses of public officials have a duty to live the values they represent? A pause lingered. Then Jasmine leaned in, elbows planted, fingers locked, her tone low but wired with force. You can't cherry-pick the job, she said. You can't choose the flowers and skip the funeral. You don't get to embrace the pretty parts of a title and vanish when it gets ugly. The words sliced the air, sharp and jagged, leaving no way back. The audience shifted, feet scraped. Someone coughed too loud. Unease rippled across the chairs. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Her eyes were locked not on her fellow panelists, but on the camera lens, boring straight into living rooms across America. We praise visibility, she said. But where was it when children were screaming in cages? Where was it when mothers begged not to be torn from their babies? Nowhere. Not a word. Just silence and a green jacket that mocked every pain it passed. The temperature in the room dropped. Off stage, a producer barked into a headset, panic setting in. The broadcast stuttered, glitched, then cut. For 8 long seconds, the screen went black. Dead air, no sound, no image, just the C-SPAN logo hanging in the void. Not for profanity, not for scandal, but because the truth had detonated too cleanly, too dangerously. When the picture came back, the silence wasn't technical, it was human. No claps, no arguments, just faces frozen in shock. Jasmine sat motionless, unblinking, a statue of defiance. She hadn't spoken a name. She didn't need to. The way she timed it, the way she slipped in the green jacket, it was a strike without warning, a demolition executed in plain sight. She had targeted Melania Trump without ever saying the words, and yet the blow landed like a missile. Jasmine's words had hit the country like a thunderclap, surgical, raw, impossible to ignore. And far from the cameras, behind gold trim and heavy curtains, Melania Trump sat in silence. But this wasn't the silence of control. It was the silence of pressure, building in a locked chamber with no release. It was the silence of someone being dragged into the spotlight without warning and realizing the world was waiting for her next move. The East Parlor of Mar-a-Lago felt colder than usual, not from the air conditioning, but from the fog of tension sinking into the walls. Melania sat rigid on a cream velvet chaise, legs crossed, spine straight, every line of her body posed for authority. But her eyes betrayed her. On the muted television in front of her, Jasmine Crockett's face filled the frame, calm, sharp, speaking like a blade cutting through glass. Melania didn't need sound. The words were already burned into her. Clips of that moment had gone viral within hours, looped on cable news, spliced into TikToks, reposted under captions like, "She said what we've all been thinking." But here, inside this fortress of marble and chandeliers, it felt different. Jasmine hadn't shouted. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't even spoken Melania's name. And still, every sentence carried her target. Her phone buzzed again on the glass table. She didn't reach for it. Notifications had been pouring in for hours, missed calls from cable hosts, frantic texts from acquaintances, even a terse message from her cousin in Slovenia. What did you do? In the glass, Melania saw her own reflection, perfect makeup, perfect stillness, but beneath it, A fracture. The sting of unfairness cut deep. She hadn't asked for this fight. She hadn't spoken a word. And still she was guilty by silence, as though silence itself was now a crime. Across from her, Helena Zavro stood clutching a printed transcript, the edges bent from her grip. She didn't sit, didn't rush. She knew the room too well. But after a long pause, her voice slipped in low, careful. We should release something, even just a sentence. Set the tone. Remind people who you are. Melania didn't move her head. Her reply was flat, almost detached. I am who I am. I don't need to explain it every time someone throws a stone. Helena stepped closer, voice measured, like someone pointing out a fire before the house burned down. This isn't a stone. This is different. People are watching. They think you're hiding. Melania's eyes finally lifted, sharp with defiance. Let them. I don't play their game. She rose suddenly, striding to the tall window, draped in ivory silk, yanking the curtain back just enough to see the mocking blue sky. Every time I speak, they twist it. When I stay quiet, they say I don't care. So, which is it? Am I fake when I smile, or cruel when I say nothing? Her tone stayed low, but the tremor beneath it gave her away. No matter what I do, they want me wrong. Helena set the papers down, sinking gently into a chair. Maybe it's not about being right anymore. Maybe it's about being seen. Melania exhaled, long and heavy. She folded her arms tight, almost hugging herself. I never wanted this spotlight, she said softly. I only wanted to protect my son. I wanted a quiet life. But he made noise for all of us. And now they expect me to answer for it. The words hung thick in the air. Then her gaze locked on Helena's, steady and final. No, I won't respond. I won't fight someone I've never met just to prove I have a heart. But outside that parlor, her team was unraveling. In the West Wing, aides huddled inside offices, voices sharp, whispers urgent. One staffer had already written 3 statements, none approved. Another was on the phone with a media consultant, the warning blunt. If she doesn't speak tonight, she loses the narrative. Her silence, once praised as elegance, was starting to look like avoidance. Headlines had shifted. Crockett speaks. Will Melania? Donors were anxious in private chats. Conservative influencers were split, half begging for her voice, half warning it was a trap. And at the center of it, Melania Trump stood frozen. She had built survival on poise, on saying less, on staying untouched. But now the same silence that had shielded her was turning into her cage. For the first time in years, she felt it not as armor, but as weight pressing from every side. Not because she was guilty, not because she was cruel, but because in the ruthless theater of perception, the one sin that could never be forgiven was refusing to play. While Melania hid behind marble walls, clinging to her silence, the outside world was already on fire. Not whispers, not side talk. Firestorms, tweet by tweet, clip by clip, spreading across a nation that had been waiting for someone to say out loud what they'd all felt, but never dared to voice. It began as a spark, a single 22-second clip, posted by a college sophomore in Atlanta, captioned, "She didn't lie. She didn't even flinch." Within minutes, it jumped platforms, sliced into TikTok, reposted on X, uploaded to YouTube by a streamer calling it the most brutally honest takedown of First Lady culture we've ever seen. The algorithm didn't nibble, it devoured. Hashtags lit up like warning sirens. Be best but silent hit first, then Crockett, in silence, Nin, speak like Jasmine, and the biting decorate but don't defend. Across coffee shops, subways, classrooms, kitchens, millions of eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett mid-sentence, jaw set, steady as steel, saying what they'd been screaming in private for years. She didn't shout, she didn't blink. And because of that, the world finally listened. By midday, the clip had subtitles in 6 languages, thanks to fan accounts from Sao Paulo to Berlin. TikTok users layered her voice over protest footage, crying children at detention centers, even slow motion of Melania descending Air Force One in that infamous green jacket. On Reddit, this is what leadership looks like, shot to the top of our politics. On Instagram, wellness influencers, who usually posted matcha recipes, were suddenly quoting Jasmine word for word. You can't pick the flowers and ignore the roots. You can't claim kindness and choose silence. People weren't just sharing it, they were swallowing it whole. A cultural nerve had been struck. Hard. In Austin, a high school history teacher killed the projector feed mid-lesson to show her students the clip. In New York, shelter volunteers stopped their meeting to watch and discuss it. In Kansas City, a veteran uploaded a selfie captioned, "I didn't vote for her. I'd fight for her." This wasn't just another viral moment. It was a release valve snapping open. A generation, women especially, who'd been told to stay polite, composed, invisible, were watching one of their own rip the script apart. Jasmine hadn't gone emotional. She had gone surgical. And the silence afterward wasn't fear, it was recognition. People whispered one word again and again, finally. And it wasn't just liberals. Conservative women who had sat in quiet discomfort for years, bound by party loyalty, were passing the clip in private chats. One wrote, "This isn't politics. It's about showing up or checking out." Ex-Republican staffers began liking Jasmine's quotes from burner accounts. Journalists muttered that this moment felt different, not just a headline, but a hinge, a turning point. On one morning show, an anchor broke script, saying softly, "Whatever you think of the Congresswoman, she told the truth, and the truth doesn't flinch." The control room froze. But the heaviest punch came from people who had never cared about politics at all. In Indiana, a factory worker stitched Jasmine's words onto a jacket for his daughter. In Arizona, a single mother posted a tearful video. "I was one of those moms Jasmine spoke about. I stayed quiet when they called us just cleaning ladies." Never again. Across the country, people weren't just reposting, they were remembering every time they'd bitten their tongues to survive. Every time they'd made themselves small to stay safe. And now, watching Jasmine Crockett hold steady on a glowing screen, they felt something stir. Permission to speak, permission to call out the polished silence that had hidden years of ugliness. Permission to finally say, "That's not enough anymore." The clip smashed 10 million views before sunset. Every refresh, the number jumped 11.2 million, 12.6, 14.8. It wasn't a speech anymore. It was a spark turned wildfire. And as it spread, something bigger began to unravel. The old mold of the First Lady, silent, graceful, untouchable, was cracking under the weight of Jasmine's words. Girls in debate clubs, moms in minivans, students in dorm halls were asking aloud, "Why did we ever mistake silence for grace? Why did we confuse decoration with dignity? Why did we call complicity noble?" Jasmine hadn't named a soul, but she had shattered a myth. The decades-long fantasy of the political wife, praised for restraint while the world burned at her back. In one moment, Jasmine didn't just take aim at Melania Trump. She pulled the curtain off an entire tradition of performative elegance. And America was done pretending not to see. If silence was grace, then what was it when the silence kept the pain alive? As night fell, the clip played again, this time projected onto the side of a Chicago building, where protesters gathered. When it ended, a chant rose, steady and strong, rolling like gospel. "You want the praise, take the pressure. You want the title, carry the weight." From Washington to Wichita, from TikTok teens to retired nurses, the spark burned hotter. Jasmine Crockett had spoken once. And the country wasn't just listening, they were repeating her. While the world clashed over Jasmine's words and Melania's silence, in a cramped office stacked with dusty books and humming monitors, a young reporter opened a file no one was ever supposed to see. In that instant, he didn't just find a document, he dug up a truth that had been buried alive. Theo Padron was 28, underpaid, overlooked, but consumed by one obsession: the truth. He worked for a mid-tier investigative outlet in Fort Lauderdale, hidden away on the fourth floor of a walk-up that smelled like stale paper and burnt coffee. His desk was chaos, scribbled notes, gum wrappers, a cracked screen, and one pinned quote staring back at him: "Facts don't flinch." Theo wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing clarity. And on that quiet Thursday, clarity came disguised as routine. Following a thread about ghost-written speeches from 2018, he stumbled into an unindexed archive of internal First Lady files. Most of it was fluff. Garden tour remarks, school visit scripts, holiday decor approvals. He almost ignored the file marked FLS WHC Draft V3 June 2018. It looked like dead weight, but habit forced him to click. At first, it was bland standard phrases about civility, compassion, our shared humanity. But then, the tone sharpened. The words cut deeper. The policy of separating children from their parents at the border contradicts the fundamental values of this nation. It is cruel, and it must stop. Theo froze. His fingers hovered above the keys. This wasn't legal boilerplate. It read raw, personal, urgent. A few lines later, the voice grew stronger. As a mother, I cannot look away. This practice causes irreparable trauma. No political outcome justifies such suffering. Theo blinked hard. This wasn't an idle thought. This was a full-blown objection to one of the Trump administration's most infamous policies written from inside the White House. But what made his breath catch wasn't the typed words. It was the note scrawled beneath them, in thick black ink, angry in its pressure. 4 words, brutal words. Do not send, he won't allow it. No signature, none needed. The ink was harsh, impatient, written after the draft had been finalized. Typed hope clashed violently with handwritten command. Someone hadn't just disagreed. They had silenced her, stopped her. Theo leaned back, staring at the screen like he'd cracked open a vault of fire. For years, Melania Trump had been painted as detached, uncaring, even cruel. But this file suggested something else. At least once, she had tried to speak and someone shut her down. The metadata told the story. Late June 2018, right at the height of public outrage over family separation. Its final edit matched internal White House security emails Theo had already traced in an earlier FOA request. Everything lined up. Formatting, phrasing, timestamps. And the handwriting? He compared it against 4 separate calendar notes from her assistant. The loops, the tilted E's, the sweeping F's, it was identical. There was no doubt. The words were hers. Theo paced his office, heart pounding. This wasn't just a scoop. It was dynamite. Proof that Melania hadn't stayed silent out of apathy, she'd been silenced. She had tried to fight privately before the jacket, before the cameras, before the stillness. Her voice hadn't vanished. It had been locked away. He called his editor immediately, skipped the preamble, and read the note aloud. On the other end, silence stretched, heavy. Then one line. If this is real, it changes everything. Theo's reply was steady. It's real. I've verified it 6 ways. His editor's tone snapped into urgency. Don't tease it. Don't tweet it. Write it clean. Write it careful. No spin. Just the truth. Theo didn't argue. He wasn't here to scorch someone. He was here to open a door America hadn't known was sealed. And echoing in the back of his mind was Jasmine Crockett's voice, replaying from that viral clip. You don't get to disappear when kids are crying in cages. Maybe Melania had tried not to. Maybe she had pushed back. Maybe the world never saw it because someone made sure they never would. Until now. Theo had already unearthed one buried truth, but something about it felt too tidy, too polished, too final. And in journalism, when a story ties itself up too neatly, it usually means another one is still hiding beneath the surface. He didn't know it yet, but what he was about to open would be bigger, riskier, and far more explosive. The folder didn't even carry a real name, just a string of numbers and one word: drafts. It was tucked deep inside the archive of First Lady Communications, attached to some forgotten memo about speech scheduling from the summer of 2020. It wasn't supposed to be there at all. Theo clicked on it almost by instinct, a last sweep. The kind you make when your gut whispers, check one more. The document took its time loading, dragging like the system itself was reluctant to let it see daylight. And then the words appeared, and Theo stopped breathing. The opening line hit like a hammer. In times of deep pain, silence is not elegance. It is abandonment. He froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This didn't sound like political polish. This sounded like someone had snapped. It wasn't the language of consultants or spin doctors. It was raw, human, like a woman who had finally had enough of watching from the shadows. The speech was dated early June 2020, just days after George Floyd's murder had set the country on fire. Back then, Rage and grief had filled the streets, cities burning, millions demanding not just justice, but recognition. And here, hidden in a folder no one was meant to touch, was a statement from Melania Trump that didn't sidestep the pain. It named it outright. She had written about listening to Black communities not with defensiveness, but with humility. She admitted that being First Lady came with a platform, and to stay silent in that moment was, in her own words, a betrayal of that platform. Theo's pulse quickened as his eyes raced ahead. Another line leapt at him. Peace is not the absence of protest. Peace is the presence of justice. No hedging, no excuses, not careful, not safe. She had put herself, at least on paper, exactly where the nation needed her most. And then the red ink, not hers, someone else's. According to the metadata, it came from an internal communications director. In the margin, the verdict was blunt. Too strong, too political. POTUS will object. And just below it, the word Theo had come to dread in these lost drafts. Delete. Not revise, not hold, not save for later. Just erase. Theo leaned back, chest tight, pulse hammering in his throat. This wasn't a pause. It wasn't someone buying time. It was final. A choice. A clean erasure of what could have been a defining moment in history. At the height of national grief, when millions searched for even the smallest sign that the White House felt their pain, Melania had tried to speak and they cut her off. Again. The same woman branded for years as distant, uncaring, had written some of the strongest words on racial justice any First Lady had ever drafted. And yet those words never reached a microphone, never left the page, because someone, somewhere decided the truth itself was too dangerous. He didn't move. He just stared at the glowing sentences until they blurred, not from exhaustion, but from a wave of disbelief and something deeper, heavier, grief. Because now he understood the silence Jasmine Crockett had condemned. It wasn't always chosen. Sometimes silence was forced, weaponized, buried under red ink and locked behind passwords. How many voices had been smothered this way? How many people believed Melania never cared when in reality she may have cared too much, trapped in a system that valued obedience over conscience? The tragedy wasn't only that the speech had been killed, it was that no one even knew it had lived. The world judged her by her absence, by words never spoken. But here on Theo's screen was proof, undeniable proof that she had tried, that she had drafted sentences in the exact moment the nation begged for someone, anyone, to show they were listening. And instead of letting those words breathe, the system chose silence. Not silence as grace, but silence as control. Theo snapped into motion. He backed up the file 3 ways, one encrypted copy, one printed and locked in a drawer, one sent to his editor with the subject line, "This is the second one, and it's worse." He didn't know what storm would come next, but he knew this. Jasmine Crockett's voice had cracked the dam wide open. And this document, forgotten, buried, resurrected, was the fuel ready to set it all ablaze. The truth wasn't finished, not even close. As Theo's revelations blasted across headlines and reshaped the nation's assumptions, Jasmine Crockett didn't step onto a stage, didn't call a strategist, didn't script a single line. She walked into her kitchen, turned on her phone, and did the one thing no one else seemed willing to do. She told the truth. Plain, unfiltered, without permission. There was no press backdrop, no polished statement. Just Jasmine Crockett, standing in the cramped kitchen of her Dallas apartment. Her hoodie was creased, her face bare. The light over the stove flickered once and held. Her phone, leaning against a chipped ceramic mug, began to record. She took in a breath that carried the weight of years. No anthem swelled, no flag waved, only silence thick, heavy, alive. Then she spoke. Not with the booming cadence of a politician in front of cameras, but with the worn honesty of someone who was finished watching power excuse itself with decorum. "I keep hearing that I went too far," she began, her voice steady, low, almost intimate, like she was talking to one single person through the glass. "That I should have chosen my words more carefully. That I crossed a line." Her head tilted slightly, eyes piercing the screen. But nobody wants to talk about the line we already crossed the moment kids were crying in cages, and nobody with power said a damn thing. She pressed her palm flat on the counter, leaned in. If the First Lady of the United States couldn't speak her mind if she was told to shut up, sit down, smile for the Christmas tree, then what chance does my mama have? She stopped, letting the silence breathe like pressure in a locked room. My mother was a school nurse for 30 years, a damn good one. I watched her stand there while furious parents screamed in her face during COVID, called her a liar, a sheep, a threat. She never yelled back. She didn't quit. She went back the next morning, and the one after that. Because that's what we do. We survive. We swallow it. Jasmine's voice cracked once, fragile but real, before she pushed through. She told me, being right doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it makes you a target. And I've carried that truth my whole life. Then she said the words that would echo for days, splashed across protest signs, stitched into jackets, painted onto walls. Silence is not neutral. Silence is choosing a side. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The words landed like a strike of thunder in a room that hadn't moved for years. The camera kept running. We act like being quiet makes us polite, makes us noble. No, it makes us complicit. If you saw kids locked behind chain link and said nothing, if you watched women mocked and laughed at and stayed silent, if you vanished when things got ugly but posed for the photo op, then you made a choice, and that choice had consequences. She blinked hard, her stare unrelenting. I'm not angry at Melania. I'm angry at a system that told her, you're only allowed to speak if your words protect the powerful. No applause. No polished ending. Just a final line, whispered like glass cutting through the dark. If they can shut her up, what do you think they've already done to the rest of us? She reached forward and tapped stop. By dawn, the video had racked up 2.6 million views, but the numbers weren't the story. The real impact appeared where algorithms couldn't track. In a diner in Ohio, a waitress slid her phone to a cook. Watch this. She's saying exactly what you were yelling about last week. In a Fresno break room, 3 janitors hunched around a cracked phone, one whispering, I didn't know we were even allowed to talk like that. A bus driver in D.C. reposted it with a line that read, I've been quiet for 17 years. Not anymore. Pundits scrambled to frame it. She's politicizing trauma, one anchor argued stiffly. But even his co-host looked down, lips tight, unwilling to parrot the line. Because deep down, they all knew this wasn't politics. This was personal. This was someone finally saying in public what millions had only dared whisper in locked cars, bathroom mirrors, and midnight kitchen talks. We are tired of being told our silence is grace. And with that, Jasmine Crockett's kitchen flickering light, chipped mug, wrinkled hoodie became the loudest room in America. After Jasmine's kitchen video cracked the wall between private survival and public silence, the world outside erupted. But inside Mar-a-Lago, something broke. For the first time since all of it began, Melania Trump didn't draft a statement. She didn't call her staff. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she feared most, not because it belonged to an enemy, but because it belonged to the one woman who saw through the quiet. At 10:17 p.m., Jasmine's phone buzzed in the dim stillness of her Dallas apartment. The screen lit up. Unknown caller. She almost let it ring out. She didn't need another reporter begging for a soundbite she'd already given the world. But instinct told her to swipe. She did. Hello? A pause stretched, taut and loaded. Then came the voice lower than she remembered from stages and cameras, but sharp, unmistakable. This is Melania Trump. Jasmine shot up from the couch, every nerve alert. I assume you've seen the video, she said, blunt, no small talk. I have, Melania answered, her tone calm but carrying weight. That's why I'm calling. The silence between them thickened, full of things neither dared to say. Finally, Melania's words broke through, slow, deliberate. I don't hate you, Congresswoman. I hate the truth you said out loud. Jasmine didn't blink. She lowered herself back to the couch, voice flat but steady. I didn't say it to wound you. I said it because it was real. Because too many of us don't get to be silent and still be safe. On the other end, Melania was pacing barefoot. shawl pulled around her shoulders, one hand gripping the marble table like an anchor to the past. Her voice trembled as she pushed forward. You said I disappeared, that I chose image over responsibility, that I only showed up for photo ops. Jasmine cut in, firm but measured. I never said your name, but if the shoe fits, stop blaming the mirror. Melania froze in place, the words cutting close. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, edged with something raw. I wanted to speak. I wrote drafts. They told me it wasn't my place, that I would embarrass the office. Her tone tightened, breaking at the edges. And I believed them. I believed silence was strength. Jasmine's reply carried no raised volume, but its weight was undeniable. And how many women paid the price for that silence, Melania? How many mothers, how many daughters, how many little girls watched you standing beside cruelty and thought, maybe kindness is just decoration? For a long beat, neither spoke, just breathing, carried through wires and distance. Then Melania whispered, almost breaking, You embarrassed me. Not because you lied, but because you said the thing I couldn't. Jasmine didn't soften, but her next words were heavy, not harsh. I don't need you to agree. I need you to understand why I couldn't stay quiet, why silence felt like betrayal. Honor. Melania didn't answer, but the absence of denial said enough. Jasmine leaned forward, voice lower now. You had a platform, so did I. But only one of us got to use it without being told we were too loud, too angry, too much. Melania's next words landed like a confession. I wasn't strong enough. Jasmine didn't flinch. Strength isn't never being afraid. Strength is speaking even when you are. Another silence stretched heavier, closer, almost intimate. Then Melania spoke, softer than before. I didn't call to fix this. I know I can't undo what I didn't say, but I wanted to hear it from you. Not from a clip, not from headlines, from you. Jasmine leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if weighing the ceiling itself. Then hear this, she said. It was never just about you. It's about a system that teaches women to smile through pain, that turns silence into class and truth into rage. The call ended without forgiveness. No unity speech, no promises. Just two women holding their choices in the air like weapons neither dropped. When Jasmine finally tapped end, she didn't feel victorious. She felt the ache of truth, a mix of justice and sorrow, heavy and unshakable. Not a win, a reckoning. And if the country had heard that call, they wouldn't have heard a clash. They would have heard something far more dangerous to power. Two women refusing to lie. The phone call hadn't ended in peace, but it left a crack. And sometimes a single crack is all it takes for the light to get in. What came next wasn't planned because some truths are too heavy for one person to carry alone. The Columbus Community Center auditorium wasn't built for history. The paint peeled, the lights buzzed, the carpet smelled faintly of stale coffee. But that morning, the air inside felt bigger than the space could hold. Nearly 200 people packed the room, teachers, nurses, students, retired women clutching folded lawn chairs in case the plastic ones gave out. Jasmine Crockett had been speaking for 15 minutes, pacing with fire in her words, drawing nods and soft gasps. Her voice rang through a cheap sound system as she declared, We're told to keep our heads down. That rage makes us unlikable. That truth makes us impolite. But if you've ever been the only woman in the room trying to hold it all together, then you know quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means prison. That's when the back doors swung open. At first, no one recognized her. The lights in the rear were dim, her coat long and plain dark gray, almost black, trailing past her knees like a shadow. She walked in without guards, without makeup, without the flash her last name usually carried. But when she stepped into the light, the room gasped, a wave of air rushing under a door. Jasmine turned, her sentence dying mid-breath. People rose to their feet, not clapping, not cheering, but standing instinctively, because no one wanted to stay seated if this moment was real. And it was. Melania Trump didn't speak as she moved down the aisle. She didn't scan every face, but she didn't look away either. She walked like a woman carrying something heavy, guilt, grief, truth too long buried. Jasmine gripped the podium, her body taut, not from anger but from readiness. A staffer hurried forward, unsure if this was a breach. Jasmine lifted a hand, stopping them cold. Let her through. A second mic was pressed into Melania's hand without fanfare. She didn't take the stage like a guest. She stepped onto it like someone entering ground she never thought she'd stand on again. For several seconds, she said nothing. The silence held. Then, in a low voice, almost too soft for the mic to catch, she began. For years, she said, accent unmasked, I chose safety. Her hand trembled as she clenched the mic tighter. I chose silence. I chose to wait, to smile, to pretend I was not drowning. The room froze, every eye locked on her. She swallowed, then added, but today, I choose truth. From the back, one person rose, then another, then another. It wasn't an eruption. It was a rising tide, slow, reverent, wet with tears. A teacher in the third row covered her mouth, sobbing before she knew it. A social worker clutched the hand of the woman beside her. The applause didn't explode, it built, like thunder rolling closer with every second. Jasmine stood still, silent, her gaze locked on Melania. Not as an enemy, not even as an ally, but as a witness. Melania's voice strengthened. You may not forgive my silence. That is fair. I do not ask you to. I came here not to rewrite the past. I came because for too long, I let others speak for me, and I paid for it quietly, alone. She turned, facing Jasmine. What you said hurt, because it was true. I wasn't erased by you, I was erased long before. And for once, I want to show up not for photos, not for approval, but for truth. Jasmine didn't answer, but her hand moved slow, deliberate, resting on the podium beside Melania's. They didn't hug, they didn't pose, but the image struck deep. Two women who had once stood on opposite ends of silence, now side by side. Not in agreement, not in unity, but in defiance of erasure. And for one suspended moment, the room stood with them. Not because they were told to, but because it felt like history was being rewritten, not in legislation, not in power, but in presence. Two women, one stage, and a truth finally too loud to bury. The photograph of Jasmine Crockett and Melania Trump standing side by side spread faster than any headline or soundbite ever could. It wasn't just a picture, it was a rupture, and within hours that rupture became a reckoning. It reached far beyond Ohio, beyond politics, beyond the two women who shared that stage. By dawn, the image was everywhere: front pages, Instagram feeds, cable news scrolls, even personal blogs. Jasmine Crockett in her dark blazer, one hand steady on the podium. Melania Trump in a plain gray coat, her face solemn, eyes stripped of performance. Neither of them smiled. That was the point. No choreography, no embrace, just two women, one forged in fire, the other freed by it, standing shoulder to shoulder, unflinching before a nation that had never seen anything like it. The headlines tried to catch the weight. The New York Times called it a new language between opposites. Politico blared, from firestorm to fault line. But it was the Atlantic that etched it into history, a handshake between candor and redemption. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. Not just hashtags or viral clips, but voice notes, handwritten letters, sermons, classroom debates. At 6:12 a.m., a retired librarian in Iowa wrote on Facebook, I'm 76. I've waited my whole life to see two women stand in truth without one being erased. A Spelman senior tweeted, this is the womanhood I was raised for. Not perfection, just courage. It was as if millions had been holding their breath for years, and two women finally exhaled, giving the rest of the country permission to breathe too. Then came the former first ladies. Michelle Obama broke the silence first, not with interviews, not with a tour, but with a single post. Sometimes silence is survival, but it should never be permanent. She paired it with a black and white photo from 2009, her standing quietly behind the Resolute desk, while men debated a policy she never spoke on publicly. The caption beneath it read, I remember. It went viral in under 20 minutes. Hillary Clinton followed with a long op-ed titled, When Your Voice Cost You. She recalled the early 90s when advisors told her She was too visible as First Lady, too involved, too unlikable. I wasn't trying to dominate the room, she wrote. I just refused to disappear into it. Even Laura Bush, usually reserved, dignified to the point of distance, released a rare public message. Even in silence, we feel the weight of what we cannot say. Sometimes the cost of being First Lady is not dignity, it's your voice. What came next wasn't just media frenzy, it was movement. One without a party label or platform, born from a collective ache finally spoken aloud. TikTok creators spliced Jasmine's kitchen words with Melania's stage statement, calling it "Speak Even If You Shake." At campuses from Ohio State to Howard to UCLA, women formed voice circles, impromptu gatherings where they stood and said the things they'd swallowed for years in the name of being agreeable, professional, polite enough. No cameras, no stage, just voice. Journalists tried to brand it as post-political feminism, but for the women who lived it, who carried it, it wasn't a trend, it was oxygen. For the first time in a long time, women weren't seeing just representation, they were seeing reckoning. Not just power, but accountability. They weren't asking to be liked anymore. They were demanding to be heard, and Jasmine Crockett had become the accidental architect of it, not by winning a debate, but by refusing to let silence pass for grace. Through it all, Jasmine stayed herself. No media blitz, no late-night appearances. She kept moving town halls, youth centers, legal clinics. Her voice the same one that filled her kitchen. Calm, cutting, unapologetically direct. But something had shifted. When she entered a room, the room leaned forward. Teachers greeted her with tears in their eyes. Teen girls in hoodies clutched notebooks, waiting hours just to whisper, "Thank you." Even her critics, the ones who once sneered that she was too loud, too divisive, began to change their tune. Because she wasn't just the woman who called out silence anymore. She was the woman who turned it into thunder. The hashtags had finally cooled into a steady background hum, but inside Akron Civic Hall, the air pulsed like a live wire waiting for one strike. The chandeliers overhead buzzed faintly, scattering fractured light over 1,000 faces lifted toward the stage as Jasmine Crockett stepped forward. She let the hush thicken until it weighed on the room. Tonight, she wasn't in her usual blazer, only a charcoal dress and a small lapel pin in the shape of an open mouth. The symbol alone drew murmurs from the front rows. Every seat was taken teachers, machinists, students, corporate managers, grandmothers clutching folded programs like talismans. Two sign language interpreters at the footlights mirrored her breathing, hands suspended like divers about to plunge. At the back, journalists packed a narrow platform, cameras aimed at a podium stripped bare of logos, because Jasmine insisted truth should never come branded. Even the stage design was raw. A black riser, one mic, no graphics, no gloss, only presence. The audience, primed by weeks of viral clips, expected fire. Instead, Jasmine began with stillness. She let it stretch until it throbbed in every chest. When a cough broke the silence from the balcony, she raised a palm, and it stopped cold. Then, voice steady, she said, "Before you leave here tonight, I want you to recognize the sound of a voice that's free from apology, free from permission, free from the weight of silence we mistake for grace." The crowd leaned forward as Jasmine's words turned sharper, curling like smoke. "Melania is not my enemy, she is my mirror. Both of us were asked to vanish only in two different languages." A collective gasp swept the room, 1,000 lungs pulling air at once. Jasmine paced the stage, her heels hitting a rhythm that matched her cadence. Describing one language as velvet, the command to be quiet and smile, whispered in motorcades and mansions. The other was steel, the command to be quiet or else, delivered in courtrooms and parking lots. Different tongues, same message. Disappear for our comfort. Bury your rage for our image. Let history remember you as decoration or not at all. Each sentence landed like a hammer but opened like revelation. Women in the aisles nodded, arms crossed tight, as if holding back years of swallowed words. Jasmine scanned the mezzanine, catching the men who had come out of curiosity, now sitting rigid, jaws tight, with nowhere to hide from the indictment. "I did not come here to crucify a former First Lady," she declared, voice rising a notch. I came to crucify the myth that silence is civility, that vanishing is virtue, that a woman's voice is only dangerous when it embarrasses power. Murmurs swelled into applause, but she sliced her hand through the air, and the roar fell obediently quiet. Then she told a story the cameras had never caught. The night her mother, a nurse, dragged herself home after 12 hours on her feet, shoes soaked in disinfectant, and confessed she'd been reprimanded for daring to ask the hospital to translate discharge instructions into Spanish. The audience leaned in. Older women in the front row clutched sleeves, bracing for the blow they knew too well. Jasmine's mother had stayed silent to keep her job, the mortgage, Jasmine's college hopes. That silence wrapped itself around their family's future, like ivy around stone. Silence paid our bill, Jasmine said, her voice trembling, but it charged us interest in regret. Heads bowed, hands covered mouths, and the interpreter's fingers blurred, translating anguish into motion that looked like fire caught midair. She paused, throat tight, then drove the nail in. So when I say Melania is my mirror, I don't absolve her. I indict the building that handed us each a muzzle and called it jewelry. The line struck sparks. A row of teenagers in hoodies shot to their feet, as if the ground itself had tilted. Applause swelled, and this time Jasmine allowed it, but only for 3 beats. Then she pressed on. If the system can silence a woman wrapped in privilege and another wrapped in grit, then silence isn't just habit, it's currency. The words hit like sirens growing too close to ignore. At the back, cameramen exchanged looks. Every script written that morning was already obsolete. The chandeliers seemed brighter now, but it wasn't the lights, it was the audience, reflecting her fire back to the stage, tears on faces catching the glow. It happened when a retired teacher stood from the 15th row, silver hair pinned tight, tears cutting down her cheeks, her voice trembling but sharp enough to pierce the silence. You make me wish I had spoken 30 years sooner. It wasn't a question, yet Jasmine answered anyway, stepping to the edge of the stage, palms open. We can't rewrite yesterday, she said, but we can refuse to leave today unwritten. The woman's shoulders collapsed with a sob she tried to swallow, and strangers on both sides reached for her, folding her into an embrace that looked like a living bridge between generations. Reporters scribbled furiously, but their pens felt too small for the weight in the air. Cameramen blinked hard, lenses fogging as they fought the urge to wipe away tears and lose their shot. Jasmine let the silence stretch again, as if grief and resolve were breathing side by side, then lifted her eyes toward the packed balcony, every railing lined with late arrivals. Some of us carry silence like heirloom china, she said, passed down from mothers who believed shattered dreams were louder than shattered plates. Gasps rippled through the hall. No one had ever dared to name that fear out loud. Her voice softened to a whisper, amplified by the absolute stillness. But an heirloom can be broken on purpose, so no daughter has to inherit its weight. The line detonated in slow-motion shock, then recognition, then applause that rolled forward like thunder chasing itself. Jasmine didn't smile. She looked lighter, as if she'd finally set down a burden she had carried for years. She closed her eyes, drew in a breath, and delivered the words that would headline broadcasts from Seoul to São Paulo. It is never too late to raise your voice, and it is never too late to learn how to listen. The sentence hung in the rafters like music, vibrating through bodies, lodging in bones. Then the dam broke the crowd, rose as one, applause crashing, tears streaming freely, strangers clinging to strangers with the urgency of survivors finding each other in daylight. Flashbulbs strobed, freezing faces mid-cry, mid-cheer, mid-conversion. On stage, Jasmine stepped back from the mic, letting the storm wash over her. Her eyes glistened but never faltered, her shoulders squared, as if she belonged to the moment and the moment belonged to history. Somewhere in the roar, the retired teacher's voice rose again, this time laughter threaded through tears, and Jasmine answered with a nod that felt carved in stone, a promise that would not break. Cameramen zoomed wide, capturing the chaos turned sacred. Fists raised, cheeks streaked, mouths caught mid-shout, all beneath a banner that no longer read as promotion, but as prophecy. Women in power. And in that storm of sound, Jasmine didn't wave, didn't bow. She simply pressed one hand against her heart, a signal louder than any microphone. I hear you. For the first time in a long, bitter season, the nation watching believed her. When the lights dimmed in Akron and the cheers gave way to silence, what lingered wasn't the memory of headlines or flashbulbs. It was a single question, pulsing like a heartbeat under every rib. What do we do with truth once it finally breaks its chains? The first lesson hits like a punch. Silence is a weapon. It doesn't bleed you out in the open. It leaves no marks you can photograph, and that's exactly why the world keeps confusing it for peace. Jasmine Crockett learned it in courtrooms, where every time she raised her voice, men dismissed her as dramatic. Melania Trump learned it in ballrooms, where every time she stayed quiet, they called her classy. Two women on opposite sides of power, cut by the same blade. Different scars, one public, one private, but both carved by the same hand. And injustice feeds on that divide. It wants us to argue over who hurt more instead of asking who's holding the knife. So when Jasmine finally ripped the curtain back, she forced the nation to see what silence really costs. That the comfort of polished quiet is bought with someone else's breath. Power is radioactive. If you handle it in silence, it poisons everything around you. If you confront it out loud, it explodes for all to see. Speaking isn't free. It always costs something. But silence racks up interest like debt, and it always comes to collect. And in a world where women are rewarded for compliance, silence isn't grace. It's shackles disguised as jewelry. The lesson, hammered into every tear shed in Akron, was brutal but undeniable. Silence will bankrupt you, even if the world applauds you for keeping it. The second lesson arrives like sirens slicing the night. Truth always finds a messenger, and that messenger doesn't have to look like a hero. Theo Padron was just a young reporter in worn-out shoes, broke and overlooked. But the file he uncovered cracked the floor under power itself. His discovery turned keyboards into wrecking balls and carved a new path for courage to move through the cracks. He proved what the system prays we never believe, that ordinary people can shift boulders. He did it with nothing but persistence and a single upload, because that's where revolutions actually begin, not on marble steps or in televised speeches, but in buzzing offices under fluorescent lights, in the hands of people history books forget to name. Systems survive on the lie that small voices don't matter. Theo killed that lie with proof. The truth is, all of us carry some fragment of a story that can change the whole picture. The question isn't if you're big enough to carry it. The question is if you're brave enough to drop it where the world can't look away. Real courage doesn't wait for a spotlight. You build it in cluttered rooms, under flickering bulbs, working against deadlines that don't pay overtime. And when that courage finally collides with injustice, it doesn't sound like a speech. It sounds like a crack in the ice right before the avalanche comes down. The takeaway is as ruthless as it is freeing. Silence will never protect you. It only makes you complicit. Speaking won't make you untouchable. It just makes you necessary. History isn't written by untouchable giants. It's written by 1,000 ordinary hands, striking the same wall again and again until the wall gives way and daylight comes pouring through. The third lesson the Akron stage burned into memory is this. Redemption isn't a medal you get to hang on your chest. It isn't applause in exchange for apology. Redemption is hard labor. Every step after "I'm sorry" is payment, and the bill never disappears. Melania's walk down that aisle wasn't long, but it felt eternal. Each click of her heel was an echo of years she had swallowed words. Each strike a ghost of silence coming back to demand its debt. When she finally said, "I chose safety," the room didn't hear confession, they heard indictment. Not just of her, but of the culture that had rewarded her for disappearing and punished her the moment she dared to speak. Redemption is heavy because it drags every ghost of the times you stayed seated while injustice stood tall. To carry it, you must name those ghosts one by one. That is why the room broke down in tears. They weren't clapping for a clean reversal, they were watching overdue. Truth crushed the myth that elegance is the same thing as virtue. And the moral landed sharp. Forgiveness is never free. The receipt is stamped on the very next brave sentence you dare to say out loud. If you want the praise, you take the pressure. If you want the platform, you shoulder the burden. Anything less is costume. Redemption, in its rawest human form, is waking up each day and choosing discomfort so that somebody else finally gets to breathe. The Akron crowd understood that, and in that understanding, they lit their own quiet rebellions. The fourth lesson was just as ruthless. Injustice isn't a single scandal, it's an ecosystem. And once you drag one lie into daylight, the whole rotten forest starts to collapse. Jasmine's kitchen video didn't just call out one silent first lady, it cracked open a truth millions recognized as their own. They saw their own muzzles in Melania's. So when Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, and even Laura Bush broke years of careful silence, they weren't just swapping sympathy. They were testifying, naming the vines that climb every rung of power and squeeze the air out of anyone who dares to breathe freely. A chain doesn't snap where it's strongest, it snaps where the weak link is exposed. Injustice hides by pretending every link is weak, every silence just personal. But the second you shine a harsh enough light, the chain breaks in more than one place. And that's the strategy. Expose one truth with no mercy, and cracks form everywhere. Through those cracks, empathy seeps in. And once empathy gets inside, it rots the machinery of silence from within. That's why Akron felt like an earthquake. The tremors traveled into laundromats, subway cars, night shift nursing stations, all the places power doesn't bother to look. Every story that came after carried the same challenge, unspoken but undeniable. If she could stand there and speak, what excuse do I have? An entire ecosystem of suppression cannot survive when a crowd decides to stop photosynthesizing fake civility. The fifth lesson hits like a hammer. A movement stops being stoppable the second it quits begging for a seat at someone else's table and starts building its own. Post-political feminism didn't come from court rulings or marble halls. It was born in hashtags scrawled like graffiti, chalk sidewalks outside dorms, circles of women huddled in late-night cafeterias daring to speak out loud. The moment women realized they didn't need permission to stand, the whole architecture of permission began to collapse. Jasmine never crowned herself leader. The people did, not with titles, but with the weight of expectation that she would keep ripping down the ceiling she had already cracked open. The moral, jagged, and raw is simple. Power never packs its bags and leaves quietly. It has to be thrown out plank by plank, lie by lie, myth by myth. And if you sit around waiting for an engraved invitation to that demolition, you'll rot in the waiting room of respectability. Akron proved what leadership really is. It isn't charm under the spotlight, it's endurance under fire. It's being willing to bleed your reputation so someone else can live their truth. That's why Jasmine's leap from critic to catalyst mattered. Momentum doesn't belong to the loudest, it belongs to the ones still sweeping up glass long after the cameras have gone. The sixth lesson is even sharper. Injustice never stands still, it adapts, which means resistance has to move faster. Within 2 days of Akron, the spin machines were already grinding. TV pundits sneered that Jasmine's words were divisive theatrics. Opinion writers branded Melania's statement as nothing more than a PR makeover. But parasites can't survive without hosts, and this time, the hosts refused to feed them. Social media didn't swallow the cynicism. It buried it. Ordinary people flooded the comments with their own raw testimonies, flooding the system with so much lived truth that the talking points drowned. The strategy was clear. You can't outrun a lie, but you can suffocate it. You smother it under a mountain of undeniable everyday truth. Every clip reposted, every kitchen table conversation, every grandmother who finally spoke up in a church circle fueled the story faster than spin doctors could sand it smooth. Because the real enemy of injustice isn't volume, it's vision. Failure of imagination is oppression's last shield. Akron shattered that shield by forcing people to imagine the unthinkable. A first lady and a firebrand, standing not in harmony, but in unflinching defiance of silence. And once the public pictured it, once they let it exist, even for a second, it could never be unseen. The counterstrike against injustice was not just louder noise, it was sharper clarity. And clarity, once unleashed, spreads like wildfire. And no system built on silence has ever figured out how to put that fire out. The story closes not with relief, but with a ticking clock disguised as a dare. What will you say before the next muzzle clamps down? Injustice is already drafting its sequels, already stitching fresh costumes to make silence look like elegance. But Akron handed you the antidote, truth spoken out loud again and again until the lie collapses under the weight of its own hollow echo. The lesson is as blunt as a drum beat in your chest. You don't need a stage, you need conviction. You don't need millions listening, you need one line sharp enough to pierce complacency. You don't need a green light, you need breath, and breath is already yours. Every machine of injustice is betting you'll forget what Akron felt like: the heat in your ribs, the tremor in your throat, that rising surge of, "I could have been louder." Don't forget it. That feeling is a fuse waiting for you to strike the match. And if doubt whispers that your voice is too small, remember the cracked soles of a rookie reporter's shoes. Remember the trembling voice of a retired teacher who stood anyway, proof that the smallest stones can trigger the avalanche. Movies end when the credits roll. Life doesn't. The lights won't come back on until you stand up and speak. Jasmine's last words don't comfort, they command. It is never too late to raise your voice and never too late to learn how to listen. Whatever comes next, whisper it, roar it, sing it, just don't let silence write your story for you. But the real danger isn't in forgetting Jasmine's words, it's in mistaking applause for action. History is littered with nights that felt like turning points only to vanish by morning, swallowed by headlines, spin, and the slow drip of apathy. The Akron crowd went home electric, their voices buzzing like live wires. But the question waiting at every bedside lamp, every kitchen table, every restless 3 a.m. stare at the ceiling was the same. What now? Movements are not measured by viral clips or trending hashtags. They are measured by the ordinary courage that survives after the spotlight moves on. The weight of this story doesn't rest in the roar of the auditorium, it rests in the quiet choices no one will ever film. A nurse deciding to correct a doctor twice her rank. A student raising her hand when the whole classroom smirks. A mother refusing to swallow the insult tossed at her daughter in a grocery aisle. These are not scenes that win awards, but they are the bricks of a new foundation. And each one borrows its oxygen from Akron. Because silence, once exposed as a weapon, can no longer disguise itself as grace. The illusion is broken. Every woman who walked out of that hall or watched from a cracked phone screen halfway across the world carried with her not just Jasmine's challenge, but also Melania's reluctant confession. Safety can become its own kind of prison. The combination was combustible, a truth spoken from fire and echoed from marble, and it dared the rest of us to stop mistaking endurance for peace. The machine of injustice is already recalibrating. It will offer new distractions, new scapegoats, new ways to convince you that politeness is nobility and compliance is survival. It will throw shiny stories at the news cycle, bury uncomfortable drafts under prettier press releases, remind you that the price of speaking is ridicule, unemployment, exile, and it will whisper, always whisper, "Let this one pass, stay quiet, it isn't your fight." That whisper is the muzzle remade. The only countermeasure is volume, not chaos, but clarity repeated often enough to drown the whisper out. This is the countdown Akron left us with. Not an ending, but a fuse already burning. You feel it every time your throat tightens with words you almost said. You feel it in the anger that wakes you at night and the regret that greets you in the mirror. You feel it in the tremor of the retired teacher's voice, in the cracked leather of Theo's shoes, in the tears of women who have swallowed too much quiet for too many decades. The fuse is not theirs alone. It is yours now. And the explosion it promises will not be fire, it will be daylight. But daylight is not inevitable. It demands something. It demands that when the next silence tries to masquerade as civility, someone, maybe you, peels back the mask. It demands that when your voice shakes, you speak anyway. It demands that you stop waiting for permission to sit at a table that was never built for you and start building one of your own. No headline will record those moments, no historian will footnote them, but together they carve the avalanche path. Together they turn Akron from a single night into a season that cannot be smothered. So here is the unvarnished truth. You are already on stage. The microphone is always live. The only question left, the one that echoes like a drum beat in the hollow after applause, is whether you will let silence script your part or whether you will risk everything to speak the line only you can deliver. Because movements don't wait for the brave to arrive. They make the brave out of whoever is willing to answer. And now it is your turn. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.